nice. We've been to a couple of these meetings. This is a nice place. This feels a little bit more. This is a working pool. These are tools.
How are you?
Oh, really? How do you
Are you serious? No, that's a really special day, you know. Yeah.
The other color was on my car.
It's just fun. I don't know how she pulled that one. She got me on St. Patrick's Day. She got my brother who just died. Sometimes this is on Mother's Day. We have a younger sister who's on and it wasn't Caesarean section. Caesarean, you might be able to stand well, I think it's
No, thanks, I'll appreciate it.
Nice stuff in your way.
No, my cook's
Chair. Well, I figured more people know we're like here to come.
I like this section. This is what it's not. That was very good.
You're welcome. I got no
Good evening, everybody. I want to thank everybody for coming out this wintry January evening. My name is Bob Dow. I'm Director of Stark Regional Planning in the Stark County Area Transportation Study. We're the County Regional Planning Commission and also the Metropolitan Planning Organization, which is a federal designation for transportation planning. And we do urban planning, transportation planning, comprehensive planning. We're here tonight for our final public meeting, forum number 3 for the Hall of Fame Land Use and Transportation Study. The first meeting was at McKinley High School. The second one was at the Tiffin campus at McKinley High School. And then tonight is kind of our wrap-up to review the draft plan. Brian Newell is with our consultants in that funding, and he'll handle the balance of the presentation. Just in short, we received a grant from the Federal Highway Administration, which is present here. They came up from Columbus, and also the Ohio Department of Transportation to do a study looking at the impacts of the Hall of Fame Village. You know, it's really focused on outside of the footprint, looking at the land use and transportation impacts of a project that is projected to go from 300,000 visitors a year to 3 million clearly that's going to have substantial impacts on the surrounding communities, and as planners, it's kind of our job to study that and look at that. With that, I will turn it over to Brian. He's with Gannett Fleming, which is a consultant that we hired, and kind of go give you an overview of where we've been, where we're at, and hopefully where we're going. So thanks for coming. I appreciate everybody being here.
Thanks, Bob. Sorry, I was just trying to figure out how to work the projector. We should have checked that half hour ago. Show of hands, how many have been to one of our meetings before? Anybody? Okay, so bear with us. Some of this will be a repeat, but since it's our last meeting, we're going to start at the beginning, tell the story all the way through, so that everybody at the end feels like they're caught up. And then we're going to ask you to go visit the boards, talk to the staff, share any thoughts or ideas. We've got comment cards if you'd like to leave us a note. We are still finalizing the draft, so if you've got an idea that you think is something we should put in the plan, please don't hesitate to put that down and hand it to us. So we'll start at the beginning. You can go keep over. So the first thing we do in any planning study is define what our goals are so that we know where we're going and how we're going to get there. And we broke this up into 4 phases. We started with the define phase, which is setting those goals, setting that direction, what do we want to accomplish. The assess phase that was when we met the first time, when we started talking about what's going on out here, what are the needs, what would you like to see, those types of data gathering exercises. Phase 3 was when we took all that information and we decided to kind of put it together and said, okay, what do we have here? What can we fix? What can we move forward? All those kinds of things got built into what you'll see later we call scenarios. And then the last thing is the implementation phase, and that's where we're at now. That's getting everything down on paper, putting together a roadmap to move some of these things forward, and hopefully making an impact long-term on the community. So what were our goals? The first and foremost was to enhance connectivity. We've got this premier development coming down the road, and how can we connect it better to the surrounding community? Keep it from being just an island unto itself. How can the rest of the community leverage this asset to gain some benefit? Some of the things we wanted to do along the way was engage the community. Hopefully that's why you all are here. Encourage implementation, which I ended the last slide with. That means we just don't want to put together a document to sit it on the shelf and say, hey, we did this. We want something to actually happen. Embrace smart technology. That's probably one maybe a little fuzzy on, but I'm sure you're hearing more about autonomous shuttles, computer-aided systems for parking and traffic management and cell phone apps and things like that. So we're trying to embrace the coming age of everything being digitally connected and helping to use those tools to manage large traffic flows, visitor information, and so forth. Then leverage development was our last one. That speaks a lot to the land use component of the study and what may happen in the future if the site itself takes off and we start to get 3 million people coming to this place. As you all know, you've seen it with malls and other things, stuff happens on the edges. You know, you start to see pressure. Other businesses want to come in and kind of glom onto all the visitors that are being drawn to that one generator. So we want to put some thought into that and see if we can help control that and steer that in a direction that's good for the community in general and not just let it happen haphazardly. So that was our final goal. This speaks a little bit more to the public involvement process that we've been conducting. We did public forums. This is the 3rd one. We've done surveys. What was it? We had 300 and some responses to the survey? Yeah. So between First Friday events, publications in the newspaper, and a whole host of other ways we tried to get the survey out. We had over 350 people respond to it. We actually had help from the Hall of Fame sending it out to visitors that they had on their list from the year before. Got some feedback from people from out of town, so that was good. Use that information to help understand, again, what people want, where they're going to, or if they come to the Hall of Fame, are they going anywhere else, those types of things. Stakeholder groups, we had a steering committee that was largely government agencies, private organizations, people who could be part of the implementation phase of this. were our guiding body on this study. But we also met with smaller groups here in the library, actually, and did some one-on-one interviews with different groups of like-minded people, neighborhood associations, safety, those types of folks, to try and get their take on what was going on. And then the last one was just trying to use social media and other avenues to get the word out. So what do we hear? None of this is going to shock anyone. The region is highly auto-centric. Basically, everybody drives everywhere in their car, and we actually got some comments of why did we even list SARD on the thing, because nobody uses that. So, I mean, there's just a full range of things. Stuff about relationships between the different jurisdictions. Found out that most of the Hall of Fame visitors stay here for the day because they're traveling less than 25 miles to get here, so that means they're all locals. They're coming to see the site, drop their kids off, whatever they do, and then they go home at night. They're not weekend visitors and things like that. The consensus that we pulled out of this was we needed to improve connections to and from downtown, try and leverage that whole connection and some of the resources that were underutilized downtown that could help with some of the overflow of the Hall of Fame. Future workforce parking was a concern, improved wayfinding for visitors, and then real-time information for visitors. So imagine you have 1 million, 2 million, 3 million new people coming to the area every year. How do you help them get places as efficiently and safely as possible? There's different ideas that we put forward related to that. So when we got into the data collection of the part of this, we found out there's actually been a lot of work done similar to this, a lot of studies, but there wasn't a lot of bringing it all together, a lot of talking to the public. So that was what made our study a little bit different, is that we made a very concerted effort to try and reach out to people outside of our room that we were sitting in. And when we started to look through these old studies, we started pulling out a lot of recommendations that were good recommendations that nobody knew about. So we put a table together, and that's just an example of it. But I think we came up with, there was like 50, out of all these studies that we looked at, there was like a dozen of them. There's like 50 some recommendations that directly applied to this area that we were talking about, and they were all good, relevant recommendations. They've just never been all put together to see how they could work with each other or build off of each other. So that was one of our first activities. And what we found out with that exercise was it was hard to manage 54 individual little project ideas. So we kind of grouped them into areas because they seemed to all fall in the general regions. So we came up with these sub-areas that we'll refer to throughout the study of the Hall of Fame and the area around the Hall of Fame, the fairgrounds in the Parkway area. That was mostly had to do with visitor parking and getting people from those parking lots up to the Hall of Fame or to the ball fields. And then the downtown and near downtown areas, and then Fulton Road was its own sub-area because it's just a major spot. And there's a lot of things that happen one into the other on that. And then if you came to the second public meeting, you saw maps that look like this, and it looks like a cluttered mess right now. But really, we tried to take all of those individual recommendations and symbolize them on a map so that people could get the idea of just how much had already been thought about in these particular areas. So we tried to do it in a way that if you walked up to the board, you could quickly see that, yeah, some groups of people have put a lot of thought into doing things in this area, and then you could see a little bit more detail about what those thoughts were. And then we had some things that came out of our group that we added to the map as well. And so that was another step in the process towards moving towards the final recommendations. So this was a new thing. The group we were working with had never gone through this process before. And scenario planning is a little bit different than any planning process that maybe you've gone through with ODOT or City of Canton or anybody else. It's not a linear process. So what we were looking for is this happens, then what happens and what's needed. So we had, skip past this. Start to look at what could be things that could influence our thinking. So if this event happened or we reached this milestone, would that take us in a different direction as far as our thinking or our needs for investment in the area? And these were some of the factors we looked at. You know, there's build-out progress of the village, downtown revitalization, the impact of smart technology, profitability of the Hall of Fame Village, basically success. And then the last one is actually the one we landed on using, was total annual visitorship. So on the next slide, we came up with 3 scenarios, and our baseline scenario is nothing changes. Right now, the Hall of Fame attracts 200 to 300,000 people a year to the site. And what if that doesn't change? They invest all this money, and they still only draw this amount of people. What would we need to do in the area to help improve the community? So a lot of what you'll see in that baseline scenario are things that are needed today regardless. Better sidewalks, better wayfinding, you know, better information, that type of stuff. The moderate scenario is, okay, well, what happens if they are moderately successful in what they want to do and they attract 1 million to 1.5 million visitors a year? So think about that. That's 3 to 5 times more people, 3 to 5 times more traffic, 3 to 5 times potentially more economic investment in the area. What would we want to do to handle that? So that's where you start to get into, okay, are we improving roads? Are we changing energy? Are we doing other technology-related things to help get people places, help lessen the burden of everybody going to one spot, spread them out? And then the last scenario is kind of the fantasy Disney World kind of scenario of 3 million people a year. I was having a conversation earlier with Marcy, and she was asking me about that number that was in the paper, comparing the Hall of Fame to the Columbus Zoo. The Columbus Zoo attracts 3.6 million people a year, or to Cedar Point is 3.6 million. So that gives you an idea of the type of traffic and visitorship that they are projecting for this area. That's 10 times what happens today. So it's a big change. So obviously the things that we are going to talk about in this scenario are going to be larger things, bigger impact, more expensive, longer to build, all that kind of stuff. And if you did that, if you get to that scenario, you're still going to need all the things that happened before it probably, right? Because we still have things that are broken today. So that gives you a little bit of a summary of how we thought through this scenario process. On the next slides, you'll start to see how we took all those recommendations and put them into those scenarios. So we kind of start to bucket them into tiers. And this was done with the steering committee, so it was 30-some organizations from the area, leaders talking about the future of the area based on the number of visitors. And we started with over 50 recommendations, we had 3 scenarios, and we asked them to start to prioritize those scenarios, or those projects into those scenarios through some criteria, decision-making criteria that we came up with as a group. Is it on the next one? Yeah. So these were some of the things that we used to make decisions with. And they're not, as you can see, a lot of hard engineering fact. A lot of them are socioeconomic, community-oriented, and planning stuff. You know, things, because the whole point of the study is to benefit the community. It's not to build roads. It's not to do all these other hardscape things. It's to benefit the community. So political priority, project readiness, public desire, quality of life benefit, economic impact. We do have traffic impact and other things in there. But I wanted to just point out that this wasn't an engineering effort. This was based on a lot of qualitative field type things. Okay, I'm good at this one. So we asked them to give each of those criteria weighting based on the scenario. So if your most important thing is the near term, then you would give the baseline the highest score. If you think that you're never going to get to the forecasted scenario, then you give it a lower score. You'll see some of them change, but most of them, as far as the core things, quality of life, visitor benefit, economic impact, public connectivity, those stay the same across all of them. So that means that those were the most important to the steering committee, that they placed the highest weight on those for all scenarios. So it didn't matter where the project fell, it needed to accomplish those 4 things. Okay, right? So those became the weightings in our table that we put together. And this is the massive table that came out of that exercise, where we have the individual project recommendations here, and then we went in and gave them a score 1 to 5. These numbers represent how well they meet that criteria. And that allowed us to put a little bit of science to our project picking. And the ones that came out the highest and the most immediate were in green. The ones in the yellow were kind of like, well, if money fell from the sky, these wouldn't be bad to have. And the ones in red are probably not going to help us a whole lot, so we're not going to focus on those. We did this for each scenario. And then in the end, we went back and we picked the ones that we thought were key projects for the area that needed to have the most focus, so the best of the best. And those are the ones you're going to see around the room. We'll talk about more in a minute. Put that stuff into a matrix. If you pick up a copy of the report or look at it online, we put this matrix together, and this goes to how do we get it done. We've got the recommendation. We've got the lead agency, so you'll see City of Canton, ODOT, FHWA, names like that on there. Then there's partners that will be involved, a relative cost, ways you can find money for it. That was a key column. We had a lot of discussion about that because right now, funding for projects is not readily available. So you have to get kind of creative. And a lot of these projects, you need multiple funding sources, multiple partners to kick in to get them done. We also have a column for who benefits, auto, pedestrian, bike, transit. And then the next steps column is what the steering committee really wanted, which kind of tells us what we need to do next. How do we keep this moving? And we're going to expand on that more in the final edition of our report. So we're down to, okay, what are our targeted recommendations? What are the best of the best ideas? The first one is Fulton Road Corridor. This is actually a combination of a bunch of the recommendations that were on the sheet. So there's 5 or 6 different ideas that were on that big table that we rolled into this one idea. And that board is over there. And what it includes is improving Fulton Road from downtown to the highway. And it's changing the lanes, changing the streetscape, repairing sidewalks, better signage, better traffic flow, basically making it a premier corridor that you would want visitors to drive up and down, and that they would actually want to drive up and down, and maybe even walk once in a while. So that's kind of in a nutshell what that recommendation is. It includes the 25th and Harrison intersection. It includes all the different challenges that are along there related to parking and businesses and housing stock and everything else. So these are what we call typical sections. So if you took a slice down through the road and pulled the rest away so you could see, this is what it would look like across the road. So in some sections you would have 2 lanes in each direction with a nice landscape buffer and then a wide sidewalk. Other places you might have 1 lane in each direction, a parking lane and a wider tree lawn. And then down at the end, a section where you have a very low profile median that would just add some separation but also some decorative effect to the roadway. And then you kind of can match it up with the different sections of Fulton that's proposed for. So that's one of the major ones. The city has been very instrumental in helping to develop those ideas, and I think that one you might see some movement on in the future. The other one is behind me. This is this is probably the newest idea on here. The idea, you all can envision the tunnel that goes under 77 now from the park, taking that and making it twice as wide, and putting a road on one side and a very wide pedestrian, we call it pedestrian street, on the other side. So we're separating the cars and separating the cars on one side and the pedestrians on the other side. And then we bring that all the way across the pool. And the idea there would be it could provide traffic relief to that area so that traffic trying to get out from the ball fields and the stadium and wherever else, if they're going south, they could cut across and go down Fulton to downtown, through downtown that way. Take some pressure off the 77 interchange. If they're coming from the south, they can cut in there. If they're parking at the parking lots or future intermodal facility, they can park there. They've got an unimpeded walkway all the way into the Hall of Fame Village. You could do food trucks and game tents and things like that along this path to make it a real kind of nice experience to walk in there. You can bike to it. If you live in the neighborhoods, the path would extend all the way out to Fulton, and it'd be a nice way to get over there. The other major benefit, if you go to the next one, is the idea of lessening the barrier effect of 77 between the east side and the west side. So it'd be a 200-foot opening, 180-foot, 200-foot opening, so that you would really get some visual through. If you're on Fulton walking, you'll see across, you can see through and to the Hall of Fame front. And that was one of the goals of the study, was connections. That's not just physical, it's visual, and any other connection that you can kind of think of. So this one not only provides a better physical connection, but it's one that we tried to do where we could provide better visual connection between the neighborhood side and the event side to the east and west. One option we looked at was taking 77 and putting it in a trench or a tunnel and just burying it and allowing you to just kind of walk across. That didn't go very far, but it was talked about. You may have heard about it, I don't know, so that's why I threw it out there. We kind of landed on this one as being the most practical of all those ideas. Right. So this is just some examples of things that could happen along that path. It could be a nice treat experience, games, as we mentioned. There could be nice decorative lighting and things underneath the highway portion of it so that it doesn't seem like you're walking into a cave and coming out the other side. If you've been to like the Detroit airport and taking the people mover underneath, they have that kind of stuff going on in the tunnels and stuff. This one, so one of the things that was identified early on was, if you live in a township, you know this. Your code typically does not include sidewalks or pedestrian provisions in your development code. And in this case, we have a situation where the city has gone right up and met with the township. And one side, you have a very urbanized pedestrian environment. On the other side, you have what was once a rural environment with no need for sidewalks and bike paths and things like that, put it up against something that has a lot of those facilities, or will have a lot of those facilities. So we started to have a discussion about people walking from the fairgrounds up to this site, not having a path to walk on, not having sidewalks to walk on. And we started to think ahead of, okay, what happens in this area, this boundary area, in the future? Is it annexed in and then redeveloped? Okay, that's great. If you follow city standards, you'd be providing things. But what if it doesn't get annexed in and it's still redeveloped? That's an option. So we proposed a tool called an overlay district, where you can overlay new code on top of the existing code to be more strict. And in this area, we've had two proposals, two different ones. The area down here, we put in language or sample language, the idea that anything that happens there would have to then provide sidewalks and pedestrian accommodations in that area. To the north, in the red area that's outlined, that went even farther in prescribing more of what you would consider an urban walkable condition, bringing buildings up to the street, parking behind the buildings, things you would see more in this type of area. Just so that it kind of matches up with what's encroaching towards it. Because as a visitor, you don't know or care when you go from one jurisdiction to the other. You just know that you're having an experience in that environment, and it's really nice if it's kind of similar. You know, you don't feel quite as comfortable when you're in one environment and all of a sudden you walk across the street and you're in a completely different environment. It's just, so something we put out as a recommendation to help kind of visitors mostly understand the area. And then this is just an example of the red box area. We got a drawing over there about if redevelopment occurs, what this overlay would kind of mimic, and that's in the report text. The other big topic of discussion was parking. And anybody who's been around here during that weekend, you know, that's a big deal. We did a little bit of research. There needs to be more research done on this. We're recommending a study be done that looks at parking on what we're calling a regional level, which means the Hall of Fame site down to the fairgrounds to downtown, that whole kind of triangle of influence there. Trying to see if there's a way to satisfy parking based on that regional approach, meaning let's bring visitors in, get them information either on their phone, in their car, signage, telling them, okay, there's open garages downtown, there's parking at the fairgrounds. Don't make them drive up to the front of the Hall of Fame and find out they can't park anywhere, and then they got to figure out how to turn around and find someplace else to park. So that's part of the strategy. The other part is figure out where they can park and how many can park where. And so the idea is instead of making everybody park on site at the Hall of Fame and have giant parking garages everywhere, let's see if we can't utilize some of the excess parking downtown or upgrade the fairgrounds so that that's better conditions and more inviting, and spread some of that burden out so that we don't end up with just a giant neighborhood of parking around an island of, you know, Hall of Fame fancy. So that's something that would likely not cost a lot to do and could be something that happens in the future. And it doesn't have to be a lot. You know, we were looking at if they could house 60% of the parking, event parking on site at the Hall of Fame, and you could split 20% downtown and 20% at the fairgrounds. Those are not unmanageable numbers with the parking that's available around here. So the other boxes out to the side there speak to some of the smart technology stuff. I don't know if it's so much of a problem here, but in some cities it's becoming a problem with Uber and Lyft drivers just driving around downtown. And if you've looked at research, most of downtown congestion is actually people circulating, trying to find parking. It's not people coming in and out of downtown. Well, now we're adding, places that already have taxis, we're adding Uber and Lyft taxis to that, and it's crippling. So the idea of, instead of having them just circulate around, maybe you have designated lots or places where people can walk to and say, okay, I'm here, come get me here. Do you have a question?
Why wouldn't you just hire a transportation company to provide transportation instead of Uber or Lyft, where it's a safe and enjoyable environment?
Yeah, I mean, there's always, that's always an opportunity. And this is not just for events, this is for all the time.
Why not?
Okay. Because we had, I just bring that up because we've had a lot of conversation in our steering committee about, well, SARTA can't be the shuttle service because we've got all of our buses out on our normal routes. So then we talked about, okay, what if there's a third party that at peak times provides shuttle service? So downtown, Hall of Fame, fairgrounds, you know, all of that, how does that help with the situation? So, anything else I need to mention here? Mentioned the smart parking, ITS stuff. Yeah, that's one of the boards back there. So that brings us to the next steps, and really the next step is to start to define how some of these things can move forward, who needs to be involved, how we can maintain momentum. We had a steering committee meeting today, and that was a lot of the conversation was, all right, we've had good success, we've had great collaboration between all these entities that don't normally come to the table in such a high quantity. How can we maintain that momentum and move forward? Because right now, regional planning and SCATS has been a great facilitator of this process, but a lot of these things, in order to put them in the ground or put them in your hand, they can't take the lead on because they're not that type of body. So that means you got to get they can still help with trying to get the other people talking, but eventually somebody's got to become invested enough to want to run with this. So that was the discussion today, and I think the final draft of our report will have a little more detail defining what those step-by-step instructions might be if somebody wants to move forward with a parking study or one of these projects. You know, what's the timeline? Even we got drilled on that today. A lot of good questions about, say we wanted to do this and we had money today. How long would it take? You know, that's a big question because you've got a lot of environmental concerns with park property and just different things. So funding's always the big hang up with a lot of this stuff. But I think we've got a good plan for some places to explore. We'll see what happens there. Is there anything after that? Nope. Do you want any questions?
Yeah,
Okay.
question.
Any thoughts, questions?
So what's the status of the hotel as far as where is it in the, construction?
I have no idea.
Yeah, that we're focused outside of the footprint of the Hall of Fame Village. It's a private development, and their timeline is their timeline. And so we don't have any more information than what has been reported. So and that's one of the reasons we looked at the various scenarios, because it allows for different development patterns, which will probably be somewhat market-driven, and then the necessary improvements associated with those scenarios. We don't, I know they broke ground, and I think there's been a lot of movement, from what I read, but we don't have any more information than what's in there.
Yeah, because the traditional process would have been, okay, the Hall of Fame Village says they're going to attract 3 million people. They put that on paper in a number of places. So we would do a plan, how do we accommodate 3 million people? And then 3 million people don't show up, and we're just like, okay, we either build a bunch of roads we don't need, or put a lot of plans in place, got the public all excited, and nothing happened. So the approach we took was to be flexible enough that we could respond to if a hotel doesn't get built, and those people don't show up. We don't need to accommodate them. So we don't need to spend money over there, we can spend it over here on something else that might affect growth, in the neighborhood or something. So that was part of the whole process, is kind of trying to look ahead and see what those different things could be, because we really have no information. Start here.
You talked about basically a streetscape, complete streetscape of Fulton Road. Maybe, Charlotte has that rail system that takes them, from the hotels all the way down and brings them, drops them off downtown Charlotte for events that are downtown. Any consideration of some type of rail system in addition to keeping the street, a traveling street for auto, and then have the pedestrian rail that can move freely without being obstructed by anything as a possibility. And also the center rail, there's a railroad track that runs north and south, Chicago Valley. It's not being used. It takes all the way downtown, pick people up at Green Airport for a regional standpoint. Has that been considered as an option to bring people and drop-off points throughout Stark County to get them from Summit to Chicago County?
So you gave half my answer away in the second part of that. First part, no, we do not consider overhead rail, skyline kind of stuff like that you see in Charlotte because we don't have the density for ridership for that. But we did look at the rail line that exists, and there were varying opinions on the viability of that, just the amount of money it would take to bring it up to modern standard to run that kind of train line. And then there was a lot of question about the usership of that because of how easy it is to get around the car. And where it really kind of got a lot of questioning was its interaction with the airport. The fact that it's already across 77 from the airport, so you bypass the parking lot, bus, basically 4 other modes of transportation to get south a couple miles before you get to the train. So it kind of fell by the wayside. I don't even know, is it on our scoring matrix?
It's not.
Took it off. It just seemed like there was not a lot of momentum behind it, but it was recognized as a potential option early on. We even talked with Akron Metro Parks about what their plans were for the future, and they were just like, we don't want to be in the train business, so it didn't go very far.
If I could just add that, we actually, when we did the stakeholder meetings here, the airport representatives were there, and their perspective was, folks coming from the Akron Canton Airport to downtown, they're going to want the fastest way. For them to have to get on a shuttle to go to a stop on the other side of 77 to pick up the train, that's going to take more time than just to take a shuttle from the airport to downtown. But it isn't, we did reach out to, that rail line is owned by the Akron the Regional Transit Authority, and it's certainly preserving that corridor because it does go downtown. That actually, there's an old spur that goes over in front of the Hercules building. I think it's important to keep that in mind as this develops and the markets, it's going to be determined by the market by and large, but we don't want to abandon it right away. And they are, talking about the multimodal potential spot where they put the parking lot by the old football fields. That's a parking lot now, but there's some talk about having some multimodal opportunities there with different modes of transportation, rail. So it just, we looked at it, it just didn't seem to have a lot of legs, but
Kind of got overshadowed by the skylift.
the sky,
It's kind of similar.
the gondolas, yeah.
I think a lot of
I was thinking since this already exists, it's like, why reinvent the wheel? It's just,
Yeah.
there's some old ways come back,
That's where we
It's
started.
already got the cleared ground, just.
It's right there, yeah.
Yeah, I say if we can incorporate it in any facet, maybe not as far as Cleveland or Akron this time, but if we can just, incorporate some on
We
it.
need to definitely preserve.
Be
it.
wise, at least explore a little further, that's.
And I think part of it too is we did some pretty detailed surveys with the Hall of Fame Village themselves and tried to get a handle on where are your visitors coming from when they do come in today. And I want to say over 90% of them within a 25-mile radius. Is that correct? And so very few were coming in from the airport to downtown, so people were driving here anyways. So the demand for that started to wane a little bit even further than we were looking at it. But the idea of keeping that line owned by the metro and available if something changed, I think is something that should take.
Absolutely.
I'm not to doubt your numbers, but I have a hard time believing it because I have a shuttle business that was driving around the Hall of Fame, and I would ask people where they come from. They were doing multiple Hall of Fame tours. They were doing a tour, and they would hit every Hall of Fame coming in. And I'd probably say that was 30% of the business that was coming those the 3 weeks that I was driving around.
Yeah, and that's probably true for that period of time. We were looking at the whole year. So collectively, you spread that out over the rest of the year, and I think it dilutes it more. But I agree, probably in that event-centric weekend, probably.
Oh, no, it wasn't just the weekend. It was a month and a half long.
You guys the way I feel that you guys are talking is all more local. You talk about a 25-mile radius, you're talking about up above Akron, and you're talking about down below New Philly. I haven't heard anything about that. Okay, one of the things that's happening down in Taos County, I don't know if you guys are paying any attention to it or not, is their tourism down there is unbelievable, okay? They have a lot of reasons to have tourism down there. I mean, why aren't we tapping into that? You need to look out further, okay? There's some real possibilities here. And I know you probably don't want to go there. One of the things I think people are probably curious about is that last point about the roundabout right there at the railroad track, because I'm sure they're like me, it's like, how do you do that, okay? I think that's really interesting. I think my question to you guys is, in your industry, is there such a thing as a demonstration project? Where, well, this is kind of a new thing and we'd like to do this. Do we have some people to buy into this? We can get money from them. They're curious. They'd like to see something like this happen. You guys have that?
In certain cases,
Boy, I'm sure there's stuff out there that I would sure be going for it, because this Hall of Fame development is more than just parking, okay, and local transportation. It's much more than that.
What you're talking, I've never seen that done from a roundabout perspective, what you're talking about, but for a streetscaping initiative, they do what they call pop-up streets, and there's organizations that do this, that if you're looking to add parking on your street or reduce the lanes or see what it would be like to have on-street dining on a road somewhere, they come in and they, for a weekend, put in little fake bollards and little fake trees, and you have a little festival and see who that attracts. But I've never seen anything for a roundabout demonstration like
Well,
a
these are two different things, but like I said, 25 miles, 25, that's the north side, almost the north side of Akron, isn't it? How far are we from Akron right now?
20 miles.
And every time we drive down to Tusk County,
I guess I'm not following your point about the radius question.
radius is from the center
I
of the
understand what
circle
the
out
radius
to the, right?
But what's your point about looking at Akron or looking at New Philly? I'm from New
How
Philly, so I understand what you're talking about.
they can help or be additionally affected by the development here. How they can
Well,
affect the development here.
That, originally when we set the study area, that just wasn't part of our market. We were looking at Stark County because we were doing a Stark County study. So we talked to the City of Alliance, we talked to Massland, we asked them about what do you have going on in the peak times during the summer, and how can we advertise that? And that's where the idea of a visitor app and visitor information came into play, where somebody planning a trip to the Hall of Fame from out of town could get all that information in one place, and then if they wanted to go, because we know from the research that a lot of times it's like the husband and the son that goes to the Hall of Fame, and the wife and the daughter want to do other things, so they visit the other museums and do things like that. So we wanted to give them a holistic trip planning app, and that's one of the recommendations that's on there is visitor information, so that we can push them out to other places in Stark County. We didn't go outside of Stark County.
Tusk County plans, and this is Zor Community Association, Zor blah, blah, blah. They plan that big antique show when the Hall of Fame is going on, so people come down there. What's the difference? So we have people down there, but we don't want to come up here, okay? Same thing.
Well, we've got, yeah, I agree, and nobody's saying that that's a bad idea. You were asking in relation to our study. We can't just include the whole state and study the whole state. We weren't scoped or funded to do that. So we have to define our parameters up front of what we're going to look at, and that's because we're doing this for Stark County. We were confined to the Stark County boundaries, but you're right, there is opportunities to leverage other things in state.
You guys said 25-mile radius. To me, those
Just to clarify a little bit the streetlight data,
Yeah.
real simplistically how we came up.
So, I don't know if it's simplistic, but everybody has one of these. All right? You have other things on your vehicle that transmit Bluetooth data and you don't even know it. There's a company that can track and find out pretty much anything about you based on where your cell phone's at. Where it sits most of the time, they know that's where you live. They know from that they can tell probably how much you make, where you want, how much college education you have or don't have, where you like to have your coffee, because they can tell the speed that this thing moves. So we were able through the state of Ohio to tap into that resource, and we could set parameters. So we could put a fence around Canton Hall of Fame area and basically say, tell us through these dates, people that visited this spot, and we could get it as narrow as the Hall of Fame. And it would track them all the way to the end of the earth and back. If they came from Hawaii, got on a plane, shut their phone off, flew into Canton, Akron, through multiple stops, got out, took a bus, walked, whatever they did to get to the Hall of Fame, it's still going to know that they started in Y. And through that data, and it's just a sampling, it's not an exact number, but they told us the majority of the people that ended their day or their trip at the Hall of Fame started within 25 miles of the Hall of Fame. So that's the radius that we're talking about. We also looked at 50 miles, 100 miles, 1,000 miles, and it just kept getting diluted. We actually have a map in the study that dots out where people come from. And you can see California, Chicago, Baltimore, but you see Northeast Ohio, and it's just covered with dots. So I know everybody thinks it's the National Football Hall of Fame, this is a national resource. It's not. It's a localized thing. And that's what the data is showing. Now they're trying to change that. The hope is that that will change. If we're going to attract 3 million people a year to this place, you've got to get them from further away than Northeast Ohio. And they've got to stay for more than a day for there to be any real economic impact here. Sir?
Yeah, I like what you're doing here because this is transportation that's outside of the Hall of Fame to keep people here. You just alluded to it. One of the great resources we have here, nobody ever talks about, is the National First Ladies Museum. Extremely underutilized, very poorly managed, and go on and on. Now it's a new day, supposedly some new things are happening, but I think everybody who's driving in that car now can come to Stark County. Everybody in that car is something they want to go to as their #1 priority and maybe second priority. So I think somebody has to bring them in, but I've never heard their name being brought up. You got the Saxon House, you got William McKinley's, I don't know what the law office or what it is, but you have that little stretch of about 3 blocks. I think that's your destination. I think that's where the destination has to be, or it has to be targeted. And I don't know, but I never hear anybody mention the National First Ladies Museum.
That's one that pops up. The other ones that were popular were
My
Javassi
sweatshirt?
and
National First Ladies.
actually the car museum was very high on TripAdvisor and our surveys. So we did try and pull some data to see where else people were going besides the Hall of Fame. That was one of our questions, and those were some of the ones that scored pretty high. Just coming back here.
I'm sure you've studied this very closely. We've seen this project go from $500 million to $1 billion. That's the cost for the property improvements themselves. I've been very concerned since I heard this. You're probably going to have to spend an equal dollar of public money for the infrastructure improvements. When I heard you talk about burying I-77, how many hundreds of millions of dollars is that going to take if you even went down that path? I don't think you're going to do that. I am totally adverse to this whole project, have been from the beginning. They have promised away all the revenues, so there's going to be no economic benefit to help repay any of this. So anyway, to get to my question, what's the bottom line, the range of outside infrastructure improvements that the public is going to have to pay? Have you sized this up? Are we looking at 300 or 400 million, $1 billion? I wouldn't be surprised if it ended up getting up close to $1 billion to do all these things that you're trying to do. Why anybody would cram a Disneyland in the middle of a well-settled area is beyond me. So what is the range of these outside infrastructure improvements at a minimum to accommodate, say, the mid-range, the $1.5 million, which again, I think is not realistic?
That's a good question. We had that discussion today. The short answer is we don't know because we did not aggregate costs across the entire matrix that we showed. We have select cost estimates that we've done for this project and that project over there, things that we see as community needs or something that could be a tremendous value in the future. Just to see, like you said, it was a great example. The I-77 trench tunnel idea, that cost estimate was $500 million.
Oh, I believe it, yeah.
So that's not in the realm of realism. So that came off the table. Like There's no way, we can't hardly fund an intersection improvement around here, let alone a $500 million tunnel for a problem that doesn't exist. So that's when we started to look at, a lot of the recommendations, if you look at the table, are smaller things, or like advertising SARTA service, you know, doing common branding between events and things like that. Things that don't cost a lot of money. I know when stuff like this happens, everybody's mind goes to, we're going to be overwhelmed by traffic, we're going to have to expand all these roads, we're going to have to blow up all this stuff. It's not what we were presented with.
Well, the I-77 tunnel is just one portion of the infrastructure improvements. Are we looking at probably $1 billion in public infrastructure improvements?
No, because you have, right now, I know you guys probably don't think you know, there's a perception that we ran into, but there's still a lot of capacity on Fulton Road to handle traffic. Some minor adjustments to the interchange that have been studied that aren't going to cost $1 billion could help improve that. Dispersing people so that they don't all have to go to one point and try and get there all at the same time, that helps lessen the need for infrastructure. So really, probably the most expensive thing on the list is that package of corridor improvements over there, which is probably $20 to $30 million. This project over here costs it out at $12 million. So they're not, I guess, in short, we didn't set out to create this gigantic, unfundable package of projects. That doesn't help anybody.
Well, I'm sure Mr. Lickner didn't either when he started out at $500 million.
Well, that's not us. That has nothing to do with us. We were hired to be stewards of the public and the public's money and understand the funding situation that's out there, and that just to pave a bike path takes 4 or 5 funding sources. So it's not realistic for us to come in and say, okay, we need 7 lanes on Fulton Road. You know, we need a giant intersection or interchange redo at 12th and 13th and up at Fulton. This is not realistic. That doesn't help anybody. So what we focused on was how can all the entities that are at the table work together to lessen the pain throughout the entire area, spread out the burden, and do incremental small things that keeps up with the pace of development. Because again, who knows when that project's going to be finished? You know, it was supposed to be done by now, right? The first time they came out and said something from what we heard. So I don't know. We haven't been involved in it. But
And the stadium costs were supposed to be what, 25 million? And now they're 137 million or maybe more.
right. So that's on them. And as Bob was explaining, our process was set up so that we could respond to that kind of fluctuation in reality. And so that's what we've done. We've put together a list of things that will probably, 75% of them probably never get done. Because the situation may not materialize that those things need to be done. So, but the ideas have been thought about, they've been talked about. That's the key thing, is people are starting to come together and talk about these ideas, and it's not going to catch somebody off guard.
Well, it is going to come back on you because you're facilitating and keeping this idea alive. Somebody should have killed this a long time ago.
If I may
Well,
check-
but it's a private project. Like, I can't come kill your deck project because I'm your neighbor and I don't think you should have a deck in your backyard.
You can if you go to the zoning board of appeals meeting.
Chuck, that's what, you know, being the director of the local planning agency and MPO, that's really one of the reasons why we pursued this grant, to get a handle on what some of those costs are. You know, we get, through our agency, through the federal and state programs for transportation and infrastructure, close to $20 billion a year, and that's what we do, is we fund infrastructure projects.
I'm not trying to give you a hard time, but
No,
there's
I
a lot of
know.
things that haven't been thought about. Who's going to relocate and rebuild McKinley High School? How many hundreds of millions are we talking about
Lots of
that?
questions, yeah, I know.
Again, that's the private side of it, but there are just too many problems with it. This is unbelievable to me.
Well taken, so. Okay.
Sir, simple question. How hard would it be to change that railroad line into a 2-lane road for a shuttle type service that would connect from the airport all the way down to downtown Canton and have multiple stops? And it would just be designated for a bus line versus a
I know what you're saying.
Because, I mean, it
would come, the most difficult part would be the grades and how much right of way they actually have. Because the railroad
well, I
tracks
know
are
it's
4
4
feet
feet
wide.
wide, and you need 18 feet to make it.
So, but, I mean, it's an interesting idea, because basically you're creating a rolling train.
Right, I mean, it doesn't, it won't cost as much to maintain, which is a rail system. I mean, and now you're connecting people from downtown to Belton Village for restaurants, and also people from Belton Village down to the hotels. Because those railroads run right past, what, 4 hotels, 6 hotels?
There was a similar idea floated in a previous study about, and I may get this backwards, but using Fulton and Stadium Park Drive is kind of, one or the other would be kind of a transit-oriented corridor where they would have dedicated lanes and then they would push traffic to the other corridor. And I can't remember which way that was, but we ran across that earlier.
But I mean,
That's kind of similar idea.
you already have the pathway, you just need to figure out how to manage it to be able to get to the point. And it wouldn't cost $50 million to do it.
Yeah, there's a lot of issues with that in terms of, was it an easement versus public right of way, and I don't know the answer to that.
You
but
still have the same issues if you're taking someone's property to widen the road.
Yeah.
I mean,
But that emphasizes the reason the corridor should be preserved as such, to keep those options open. It's a lot easier to do something like that.
That was kind of where we ended up with the train track discussion, was that nobody knew what the best solution long-term would be, because again, we don't know what the future visitorship's going to be. But the idea that if we have a corridor and it could be useful in the future, instead of letting people take pieces of it away, keeping that preserved was something that was agreed upon.
I understand that, but I'm saying that right there could solve a lot of connection problems just immediately versus, 20 years down the road where you're trying to figure out how we're going to get all these people down there. That would solve the problems for when Hall of Fame Week does come, that you have all the people in the hotel staying in Belton Village, getting down here and leading the traffic problem and the parking problem all over.
Who would else?
Right. I mean, you eliminate, what, 1,500 parking spaces without an issue?
That's a good thought. Sir?
We still have the Lincoln Way station there on West Tusk, underutilized.
Yeah, that was
And it's
talked
a good
about.
transfer point.
That was actually talked about, expanding that for worker parking and shuttling workers from that spot up to the site, so you didn't have to eat up on-site spots for workers.
It's all more parking spots. I mean, you might as well that, but just that one train line.
The 4 projects that you got around there were just kind of selected to put in front of us tonight in a particular way, or just kind of samples of some possibilities that the group thinks are.
It was a little bit of both. It was to show kind of the cross-section of thinking. And then also, since it was funded by transportation sources, these 2 projects were the easiest to kind of visualize for people. The rest, if you read through the table, kind of more cooperative things, or things that aren't taken on dirt. So that's pretty much what that is. Other questions?
Okay.
Well, out of all this, what was the first one that you guys wanted to probably try to implement out of all these? The corridor for Fulton first?
Yeah, I would say
what's your
low-hanging
top
fruit.
pick?
Yeah, the low-hanging fruit that pretty much everybody agreed upon is a Fulton corridor. Yeah, that seems to be
The parking study.
well, yeah, that's it.
The what was it?
The parking study.
The parking study, and then Fulton. And I know the city's looking at doing some things now with that, because there were some of the other plans. One of them showed the connection being through the park system, which was problematic. The other one was 12th Street.
Yeah, there was some stuff about
Seems
changing.
everybody settled on Fulton that some type of a streetscape, even if nothing else happened, in the existing baseline scenario. I think there's a lot of interest in improving Fulton and that corridor into the downtown.
The city submitted that for, if you guys are familiar, with the Build Grant program, kind of presidential They submitted an application for Fulton this last round, did not get selected, but they've already shown some good interest in making some improvements there into the 25th and Harrison intersection, and trying to figure out a better way to do that.
Do you think they would, I'm sorry, do you think they would improve the road or street to Stark County Fairgrounds, to bring a shuttle back and forth to the Hall of Fame?
Between the Hall of Fame and the fairgrounds?
Would that be included?
We did talk about that with the context of what sidewalks and.
Yeah, it wasn't the street itself, but we did talk about a walking path or sidewalks. Where we kind of landed with the fairground discussion was a need to improve the parking surface. They didn't want to go, the feeling in the room was nobody wants to go to the expense of paving it, but there was some momentum behind possibly doing some heavy aggregate surface lots there instead of just grass. So it would be a start.
Yeah, there seemed to be, between there and the fairgrounds and also there in Myers Lake, there was some interest in improving some pedestrian connectivity there. And I think we talked about that in a general sense.
At a very minimum, I think the minimum solution discussed was to sign it, like a walk-in route to the fairgrounds. If people didn't want to wait on a shuttle, they could follow the signs. They'd have to walk on the street because there's no sidewalks, but at least they would have a designated way that they would want to go. Anybody else ready to break out and go to the boards? Okay. Thank you.
Well, I hate to be a naysayer all the time.